Welcome to the Beau Show, the home of faith, family, and freedom. I'm currently in Washington, D.C., and some of you may have seen me on NTD's live election night special, where I talked about the effects of social media on this election, as well as what happened with swing and independent voters, who are what you might call politically homeless. Well, since it's been a few days, and with some results still outstanding, I thought it would be prudent to analyze some after effects that these midterms demonstrated. Because some were trends that you could say were predictable, and some that defied history. The first area where I want to focus is my home state of Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis trounced his challenger Charlie Crist by almost 20 points. This is incredibly significant because DeSantis is loved in Florida. But remember that Florida is not some default red state. When DeSantis barely won in 2018 by half a percentage point over Andrew Gillum, a guy who was photographed passed out on the floor with drugs and male prostitutes, Florida had a higher Democrat voter registration than Republican. But DeSantis flipped that. All those East Coasters who moved down to Florida, which you would think would bring their blue voter preferences with them, must have evolved. And I think that's a testament to his leadership, from the pandemic to challenging the medical establishment, to pushing back on woke Disney, to upholding the rule of law. DeSantis represents this combination of matter-of-fact speech while maintaining diplomacy. His wife is also a first-rate first lady, overcoming breast cancer. DeSantis both talks the talk and walks the walk. He doesn't really sound like a politician. He sounds more like a CEO. And Florida is a microcosm of the United States. It is quite diverse, and each city is rather heterogeneous. Specifically, DeSantis was able to flip the traditionally blue Miami-Dade and Osceola counties red for the first time in more than 20 years. That means that Latinos voted for DeSantis. To see that kind of significant shift is a major headline from the results. Let's hear from the governor on his re-election.
Today, after 4 years, the people have delivered their verdict. Freedom is here to stay. We fight the woke in the legislature. We fight the woke in the schools. We fight the woke in the corporations. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
Just as notably, Senator Marco Rubio defeated his Democratic challenger Val Demings by about 16 points. These margins of victory for DeSantis and Rubio were enormous. You don't usually see these types of margins anywhere, especially in a state like Florida, where the voter composition is relatively even. So when we look at Florida, it tells us that the state has moved more Republican, that Latinos have shifted more Republican, and that Ron DeSantis has the ability to convert people, which may have much bigger implications in 2024. And that's a worthy consideration when you think about what candidate can convert and move the needle the most. The Latino vote clearly mattered. And I wonder if Latinos outside of Florida would feel the same way. And if you're looking for a model of how to run a state and win re-election in a landslide, you have to look at the DeSantis model as the one to pattern by. It was decisive leadership with some great rhetoric and charisma. He made Florida better regardless of what political party a voter belonged to. So to me, the number one headline coming out of these midterms was Florida and the enormous victory of DeSantis and Rubio. Number two, the victories of Governor Brian Kemp in Georgia and Greg Abbott in Texas are also notable. This is because they were faced by challengers who had a lot of money and a lot of press. In Georgia, Stacey Abrams has been consistently building her case, even though she lost the last go-around. She's been on the late-night shows, and some have floated her as a presidential contender, but she can't even win on her own home field. She lost to a normal, uncharismatic white guy. And Beau O'Rourke, who has had millions of cash poured in by the DNC and California to turn Texas blue, lost the governor's race to Greg Abbott. So the point I want to make about the Georgia and Texas governor's races is that celebrity alone and money alone cannot win you an election. Abrams and O'Rourke were probably the two most high-profile Democrats running this cycle, but neither won. But as we think about celebrity on the Republican side, it's not like Donald Trump had an impressive endorsement record this go-around. I will focus on Pennsylvania here, a state that Trump won in 2016. However, he endorsed gubernatorial candidate Doug Mastriano, who lost to Democrat Josh Shapiro by over 13 points. That's sad, with an exclamation mark. He also put a lot of focus on Dr. Oz, who lost his Senate race to a stroke victim. I'll spotlight Pennsylvania in a moment, but let's continue for now. The Trump-endorsed Don Bolduc in New Hampshire lost his Senate race by 9 points. So Trump's record of endorsements was a mixed bag, where he did help a number of candidates, but when some of his candidates lost, well, they lost pretty badly. Now, it could be that these were just not the right candidates, or that they didn't reach suburban voters. But it needs to be noted that Trump doesn't always have the Midas touch when it comes to endorsements. So let's talk about Pennsylvania now, because that's another big story. The Senate seat was vacated by Pat Toomey, a Republican. So Dr. Oz was trying to maintain that seat. Oz was a heart surgeon. His opponent, John Fetterman, was a hoodie-clad, goatee-covered slacker who was strangely the lieutenant governor. The effects of his stroke showed up in speeches and debates. He could barely put a sentence together, but yet he somehow convinced Democrats and independents that he was a better choice over a heart surgeon and TV doctor who has made health a priority and helped countless people. How could this happen? Well, we have to take into account the abortion issue, which Fetterman ran on. Oz embraced the Supreme Court's ruling, and young people may have been one-issue voters. And then in the suburbs, perhaps sympathy for Fetterman's condition gained him votes, or they voted well before the debate. But let's think about this too. A longtime Pennsylvania state representative, Democrat Tony DeLuca, was reelected in a landslide. But here's the catch. Tony DeLuca is dead. So rather than electing a third-party candidate, Pennsylvanians elected a dead guy so that it would trigger a special election. Or they were simply unaware that he was dead, or just voted on name familiarity. I have to say, though, Pennsylvania has some very strange voters and very peculiar voting laws. I still don't trust them. But if Democrats can win in the governor's and Senate races, and one of those candidates is mentally not all there, something is quite strange in Pennsylvania. But come on, man. Look at this. Dr. Oz has 1.1 million followers on Instagram. Fetterman has 149,000. Do you really believe Fetterman could win that fight? It just seems off. Pennsylvania seems off. For a state that has a city like Philadelphia, where crime has surged, it is amazing to me that economy, inflation, and crime were not important to Keystone State voters. Even when Fetterman attacked oil and gas, Pennsylvanians stood by him. Do I think that this was from Oprah's endorsement? Not necessarily. But the Fetterman-Oz race was the most expensive of the entire cycle. Could it also be that Oz was a candidate with no experience and whose out-of-state residents turned voters off? Perhaps. So now let's examine another revelation. Independents did not hold Joe Biden and his party responsible for the economy, inflation, and other malaise. Democrats won the independent vote by about 2%, when it was expected Republicans would win them over by a long shot. This defied history. 75% of people polled said that the country is headed in the wrong direction. So how could the Democrat Party win? 70% of people said that overturning of Roe v. Wade was important. Somehow, Democrats were intuitive about that and ran that as their number one issue. And I bet it'll come up again in 2024. 86% of people thought that the future of democracy was important. Perhaps that means that independents were leery of the election fraud narrative and the relentless January 6th Commission. As much as we all hated hearing it, it kept this idea alive that democracy was in jeopardy. So as much as I thought that the Democrat Party was doomed in these midterms, they somehow played their cards surprisingly well and attacked the early and mail-in vote. But we have to talk about the fact that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell also failed. He's supposed to be the leader of Senate Republicans and also help some governors retain their jobs and also help other candidates win. So in terms of quality of candidate, I think Mitch McConnell did a poor job of finding the right candidates. And perhaps Donald Trump did a poor job of vetting the candidates. Maybe Dr. Oz, in really being a New Jersey resident, was not the right person to run. I mean, I think he's a great candidate in any state, but they were able to paint him as an outsider. Fetterman, for all of his flaws, was a native Pennsylvanian. Now, in terms of Kari Lake in Arizona, I think she's a rock star. She has all the right goods, and Trump endorsed her, but she's still in this dead heat with Katie Hobbs. I think in the end, the NRCC did a better job of finding Republican candidates in the House than the NRSC did in finding senatorial candidates. But let's also look at this from a 30,000-foot view. Will Republicans take the House? Maybe by the skin of their teeth. They've just lost the Senate again.